We're in Matthew 5, verse 3, and my main goal when teaching this to students is to really demystify or de-churchify this word blessed. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Particularly for students who maybe grew up in the church, this word blessed can be thrown around a lot, and maybe so much so that it's beginning to lose its meaning. So what does it mean that when Jesus starts his sermon, arguably one of the most important sermons, he uses this word blessed? Well, it is the word happy. Happy are the poor in spirit. Happy are those. And so Jesus' Sermon on the Mount is a sermon about happiness. And I think that that's really important to point out, particularly for students. We're just going to go through that. And we are, if you haven't seen the intro video to this Sermon on the Mount series, you can check that out. And the next thing, we want to jump into poor in spirit. We definitely want to understand that. But first, we need to understand what Jesus is saying about being blessed. And so Jesus' first teaching is on happiness. And that needs to be emphasized more and more. We're also comparing Jesus' words to how the world might look at happiness, because this is part of a whole series that we've done on the kingdom of God versus like the kingdom of the world. You can go back and look at those from Hebrews 11. And so the world usually thinks of happiness as being kind of linked to things. If you can acquire a bunch of stuff, then you're going to be happy. And so we think of things as making us happy. What are the things that make you happy? And we did this as an exercise for our students. You can do this, but basically just sit down and write down some things that make you happy, or that you think of when you think, oh, okay, this would make me happy. Like a favorite food. Maybe it's an activity that you like to do. You like to go on walks or hiking or something like that. Maybe it's a person, a best friend that you just like, man, I need to hang out with this person. They always help me feel better about life. Maybe it's like a love language, receiving a gift or something like that. So kind of prime the conversation with what are the things that make us happy, and how does the world kind of think about happiness as being contingent or linked or relying on things. And then we look at the kingdom of God and kingdom people being happy. Now, when we talk about kingdom happiness, we're not talking about contrived happiness. This is not pretend happiness. We're going to get into something that maybe is hard to understand because of in our minds, we think of happiness being so linked to things. But kingdom happiness, what makes kingdom people happy is being kingdom people. Being. Did you see that? Not receiving something, not getting something, but it's more tied to your identity as a person of God's kingdom. And a person of God's kingdom is a happy person. It's a part of who you are. It's a part of your being. I'm getting a little philosophical here, so forgive me, but it's not something necessarily that you feel. It's certainly linked to feelings, and some things can make us feel more happy and less happy. We'll get to that a little bit. But the point is that if things in this world can change how you feel, then we need to take a good hard look at those things and how important they really are and how much value we place on them as opposed to just being kingdom people. And when we look at our identity as kingdom people, we realize that there is nothing in this world that can change who I am on an identity level. There are things that can make me feel more or less happy, but there's nothing that's going to change my identity. So that's philosophical, and I apologize if that's annoying, but yeah, that's it. That's where we are. And so this, I think, as we look into happiness and what it means to be blessed, this is telling us that we're talking about something deeper and more meaningful than what we would often think of as happiness from like a world standpoint. So thank you for bearing with me on that as we kind of do the philosophical part. And so now we can go back to the list of things that make us happy. So we did the exercise. Students, you can write this down. Small group leaders, you can write that stuff down. And then we can open it up for discussion. Now that we know what we're talking about, that the world thinks of things as kind of having a control over the feeling of happiness, but as kingdom people, it's really more about identity and who we are. So those things are not necessarily bad. They certainly can be if we put too much weight on them. But they're not ultimately what makes us happy, because when they are gone, or when we become poor of those things, does that make us unhappy? At this point, I almost have to talk a little bit about pain and loss and stuff like that, because again, we're not talking about a contrived happiness. This is a happiness that can exist through loss. If something is removed from my life, can I still endure enough to access happiness? Yes. From a kingdom standpoint, the answer is yes. Because when those things are gone, when they've been removed, I can still be happy, because happiness is more a part of my identity as a kingdom person. Not easy, right? I can just say that we can all just kind of agree that, wow, that's a really nice thought, Pete, but that's not easy to get to. And I agree. But that's what Jesus is saying. So even though it's challenging us, that's what he said. And he's got a better view of reality than I do. And what Jesus said is, blessed are the poor. Blessed are those who don't have, what they have has been removed. They are poor. They are impoverished in some way. They lack something. And yet, they're happy. So that challenges me. But we shouldn't read this necessarily as if person does something, they will receive. If somebody does X, they will receive Y. This blessing. It's not like, okay, so here's the key. Just become poor, then you'll be blessed. It's more pointing again to that condition of who we are, a quality of our spirituality that is already present in us as people, right? Not from a legalistic standpoint of Jesus is giving us some key to happiness, and it's like, okay, so now I got to go be poor in spirit. Well, if you're trying to become poor in spirit, then probably you're not going to become poor in spirit, because you're trying to become poor in spirit so that you can get something. And that's not how you really become poor in spirit. And so, and maybe that is a good segue to this. Acute loss is real. Okay, when you lose something, it is loud in your life, particularly when we're talking about maybe a loved one in your life. Maybe you lost a job and you're wondering how to feed your kids. Okay, I know students, you haven't experienced that maybe yet in life, but maybe you lost the chance to go to a college that you really wanted to because you didn't make the grade that you wanted to, or maybe you lost an opportunity to play in a band or something like that. And that can be loud in our lives. And so when Jesus is teaching on happiness, when he's preaching on happiness, when his message is about happiness, he's not disregarding or dismissing the fact that we have real pain in our lives. But it's in some way, and this is where, I'm learning this stuff as I go, right? This message from Jesus challenges me. But what it challenges me to do is sort of grapple with that tension that I can have pain in my life and still have access to real happiness. And I don't quite understand that. But that's what Jesus is telling me. And so if you want to, you can go back, you can look at the lessons that we did on the purpose of pain. You can look into this. I don't have stats to pull up for you right now, but you can look at any of the studies done on post-traumatic growth. You can look at the work of Dan Allender. You can look at how people that have gone through trauma and pain in some ways even have access to more happiness in their life post-trauma. And that's just something that people are exploring. There's not, there's sort of a mystery there that we have to acknowledge, but it seems to be true. And so that's kind of deep. That's kind of intense. But again, that's not something, I don't pull punches when I teach students. Students are aware of the pain in their lives just as much as leaders are, and youth pastors and parents. And the church has to be a place where we can talk about that and we can address that. And so, and I really do want to make sure that when students hear this lesson, they're not hearing, okay, just fake it. Just fake this happiness. Happiness is something we fake as a church. It's like, no, like happiness is not something we fake. Happiness is something we're granted divinely by God through being kingdom people, being a part of his kingdom that he's telling us about. And what he's telling us is, blessed are the poor. Blessed are the poor. Blessed are those who have lost. They have a spiritual poverty, which again, there's a lot here, but there's that sense of dependency, that idea that like from like in a very real way, I am absolutely dependent on God, and theirs is the kingdom of heaven. We are kingdom people. It's not a fake it till you make it type of thing. We're not pretending about this. What we are is people who have access to a different type of life that Jesus is giving us clues to. And so here's an example. We've just gone into kind of like deepness, but maybe this is just like an easier example to grab a hold on of the happy daughter of Mr. Jones is blessed, for she will inherit her father's farm. Okay. So the daughter is already happy. We can see that, right? The happy daughter of Mr. Jones. She's not working to inherit the farm. It's something that she's been granted. But however, her present happiness is linked to or the result of her future inheritance. And I think that is key. And again, you can go back to Hebrews 11, right? This longing for a city whose builder and architect is God. This place that we're truly meant to dwell in. We were meant for the garden, and we have been exiled from the garden, but God is making that new, and he's saying, I have a place for you, and that place is your inheritance. And no matter what happens in this world, we have assurance of that inheritance. And in some ways, that is how we can live in this tension of experiencing pain for what it is and yet still being happy people. It's because we have that inheritance. And so I kind of like a silly illustration for this, but our identity as a child of God never changes, and your inheritance as a child of God never goes away, right? So we can rest in that in some level. So yeah. My illustration, again, I know I kind of went deep and philosophical here, but my illustration for students was to play Piper, that little short film where the little bird goes and finds that the clams that all the birds are really looking for. They're looking for these clams under the sand, and they have to wait for the little bubbles to pop up. Piper realizes that if I just go into the water, I can see where all the clams are. And it's really terrifying and a traumatic experience. But eventually, there's this great joy that Piper has. And that's like maybe the whole point of the show. And so I left students with that image of Piper running around the beach, basically becoming an evangelist for going into the water. Yeah, it's terrifying. Yeah, it's big. Yeah, it's an unknown. But once you go into that water, once we become kingdom people, we see the world differently. And now I see where the food is, right? And I can go and get it. And so that was kind of, for me, that was the illustration. So you kind of leave with that, even though, you do kind of have to, when teaching on happiness from kind of this kingdom perspective, again, at least for me, and you can let me know how you feel about this. I really just don't want to be like the pretend happiness. And so I feel like it's almost necessary to talk about the fact that we're talking about loss here, poverty. We've lost something, and that can lead to pain and trauma in our lives. And so rather than trying to skirt around that, I kind of allow for our time talking with students to address that, but then leaving us with this kind of joyous picture of Piper. So there you go. That's kind of the idea that, at least for me, that was what I'm working with when it comes to this word blessed. and really wanting to demystify it, de-churchify it, and realize that what Jesus is talking about is happiness, and real, genuine happiness that can exist even in a world where there's loss. So yeah, that's kind of where we're going to pause this part, and going to continue to make more videos in this series. So check those out. You can check it out on the podcast as well. So thanks for being a part of this community, and I will catch you in the next one.